Good afternoon, Mr. Johnston. You've recommended a process going forward, a review of your findings by two bodies and hearings that you would hold on the process, the things you found about miscommunication of intelligence, mishandling of intelligence. But you've heard the criticism from the opposition and others about your appointment, about your role based on your relationship with Mr. Trudeau's family. So why are you the person to lead those hearings going forward rather than a judge, an independent judge who could hold hearings in camera or in public?
Well, let me respond by stating basic facts. First of all, my friendship with the current Prime Minister. When our children, 5, were ages 7 to 12, we had a condo at the foot of Mont Tremblant. I knew Mr. Trudeau's father. He had a country home about 50 kilometers away in Val-Morin. On, I think, 5 occasions over several years, he and his 3 sons came and parked their car at our parking lot outside our condo, and we skied. On one of those 5 occasions or so, he had to leave early to get back to Montreal, and on that occasion, I drove the 3 sons over to their mother's home, country home, which was about 10 kilometers present. Those are the so-called neighborhoods. My friendship with the current Prime Minister was based only on a few skiing expeditions with my children. He was a student at McGill where I was principal, and amongst about 20,000 students, I would see him from time to time. In that period of time, until he became a Liberal member of Parliament, and I was Governor General, I had no meetings with Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Justin Trudeau. I had no letters that I can recall, no telephone calls. The only occasion I recall meeting him in that period of 40 years was at the funeral of his father, which my wife and I attended. So there was no interaction with respect to the current Prime Minister of a friendly kind, other than the respect I have for a graduate of McGill University. And my only real contact occurred when he became an elected member of Parliament and I held the office of Governor General. Those are the facts of the so-called friendship and the scheme. With respect to my connection to the Trudeau Foundation, I've been a general manager of universities for 27 years, very interested in any scholarship program. The Trudeau Foundation one was very important because it provided scholarships for graduate students in the humanities and social sciences, a rather neglected area. My contact with the Trudeau Foundation was this. In about a year after I finished being Governor General, late in 2018, I was invited to become a member of the association of the foundation, which is like shareholders in a company, who meet once a year with the responsibilities to receive an annual report, to approve the financial statements, to appoint auditors, and to elect the board of directors. My contact was simply that. I think I attended 4 of the annual general meetings, perhaps 5 by Zoom. The one which took place in Ottawa, I think I was there for about an hour and a half. And had other appointments. I did make donations, as I think the other members of that association, not the board of directors, not involved in decision-making. The alleged the gift that is under controversy was 2014, 2015. I joined in 2018. I think over the course of 4 or 5 years, donations were of the order of $300 or $400 a year, which would be less than 1% of the donations my wife and I make regularly to a number of scholarship funds that we support across the country. The third fact is this. I've been fortunate in my public life to have served as chair of or member of advisory committee or task forces on probably 2 to 3 dozen different occasions over those years, with appointments by prime ministers, several, premiers, several, ministers, and on none of those previous occasions has my impartiality or integrity ever been questioned. This is the first time it has happened. And let me simply say that's very troubling for me, because this kind of baseless set of accusations diminishes trust in our public institutions, and deters people who are publicly minded, who are quite prepared to take on public service responsibility task forces and so on. There's a chill on that, and that's very troubling.
Sorry, you addressed the question of whether you are, the criticisms about whether you're in conflict, but not the question about whether a judge could do a better job here, sworn in, hearing testimony in private or in public, sorry. And also you have recommended review by two bodies, NCICOP and NSERA, that opposition critics have already rejected as sort of under the control of government because their reports and their access to information is vetted by the government.
Well, with respect to who might lead a public inquiry, that person or persons would have the same fundamental problem that we and our team have had, that one cannot deal with these allegations with respect to negligence or managing things to provide partisan advantage without a full consideration of all of the information, including classified information. And that can't be made public. So I don't know whether another person would have any greater ability. With respect to experience, I'm a lawyer, a professor of law for some 45, 55 years, and I guess I've had some responsibility for making judgments of different kinds, and one will have to stand on that. Just give me the second part of your question again. Yeah, and it's important spending some time on those bodies. NCICOP was created in 2017 as a response to this growing foreign influence effect. And it's made up of 4 parliamentarians from the governing party, 2 from the opposition party, the Conservatives, 1 from the New Democratic Party, and 1 from the Bloc Québécois, and 1 independent senator. And they have been at work with their staff since 2017, and their job is to review, among other things, foreign influence in our elections and our other democratic processes and protect them. They report to the Prime Minister, their report goes to Parliament, and that is the body that has the important oversight function with respect to how we manage this danger of foreign influence. That body has been charged with the Prime Minister to review the same terms of reference mandate that I have. And I have invited that body to take my report along with the confidential annex and to review it with great care. Also suggested that they work closely with NSERA, which I'll comment in a moment, and that the leaders of the 3 major opposition parties be invited to take top secret clearance and join in viewing that material and coming to whatever conclusions they want to with NCICOP. That's Parliament functioning as it should be, with an oversight role. That's where it belongs, not with a retired judge and not with a professor of law of some years. That's where Parliament has to function. NSERA, the National Security Independent Review Agency, is an executive agency with experts on foreign intelligence and other things. It's appointed on the recommendation of the Prime Minister in consultation with the leaders of the opposition parties and the leaders in Senate. So that's a collaborative appointment. Its job is to review the activities of all the agents of securities and intelligence and any particular matter that deals with things like foreign influence. That body, too, is an oversight body of Parliament. That's the kind of body that should be functioning to oversee these things.
Chaired by a former judge.
Chaired by a former judge, especially. Thank you, Sheila. Chaired by a former judge, a dean of law, a law professor, a former national security investment advisor, intelligence advisor, and an entrepreneur are the makeup of that particular committee. That was created in 2019. Both of those committees provide their reports to Parliament, and both those committees have a fundamental responsibility and oversight role that's just very precious, and that's the kind of oversight that we should be using, I think, to deal with these matters.
Anne-Caroline Desplanques, je leur demande. Non? OK. Je m'excuse.
Raphaël Pirot, agence.
Raphaël Pirot. I'm a colleague of Caroline's. I'd like to begin by having you summarize the first question. So get back to your links with Mr. Trudeau and why you're the right person to conduct this inquiry. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I'll repeat it in French, please. Could you tell us what your links are with Mr. Trudeau? Yes, the connections with Mr. Trudeau. Repeat that in French, and why you're the right person for this job. Okay, the facts are very simple. When he was young, maybe he was 12, and he and his two brothers, we have 5 daughters around the same age. We had a condo in Tremblant where we'd go skiing on the weekends. I knew his father. His father had a house in Valmorin, about 50 kilometers from Tremblant, where we had our condo, right at the foot of the mountain, and 100 meters from the ski hill. Mr. Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau, would park his car on our driveway for a day of skiing, maybe 5 times over 2 or 3 years. That's the contact I had with the current Prime Minister. After that, he was a student at McGill, where I was the principal. So I knew him as a student, but not a personal connection. Since that time at McGill, I have not had any meeting or exchange of letters or phone calls or any contact with the current Prime Minister, except at his father's funeral. The other contacts, once he was elected as a member of the Liberal Party and then became Prime Minister, I had contact with him as Governor General, but that's all. The point is that for 40 years, I had no contact with Justin Trudeau, not as a friend. Those are the facts. Thank you. My second question is, the only person
Answer in English. La seule
the only person in the whole report who attributes any malice to you is the one who leaked the information. So there's somebody in security circles who's leaking information, and this person should be identified and perhaps pursued with all due diligence and necessary energy. It's probably because of these leaks that we're here today investigating foreign interference, which is necessary in your view. So indeed, we have to investigate this. It's a serious matter. But without that person, we might not be here. Do you think that the person who did this leak in some way is contributing to the success, or maybe I'd say the defense of Canada's national interests?
Thank you.
Okay, if I understand your question properly, si vous comprenez votre question.
If I understand your question properly, is it possible for a single person to make all these revelations? Absolutely not. That's why I have a team.
So basically, the only person that's been pointed to as acting with some kind of malice in this in your report is the leaker from the CSIS, and or leakers maybe.
Sure.
And so, in a way, it's because of these leaks, though, that we're here and we're investigating on this issue.
Sure.
Which is an important issue, as you identified. So in a way, is that leaker not contributing to our national interest in a way? And did he do something right in a certain sense, even if he broke the law? Because if it wasn't for leaks, we probably wouldn't be here.
Well, I want to be very clear in that answer. Certainly the attention that the media have given to interference in our foreign election is important and is very useful at this time because it's a very substantial danger. It's growing and it needs to be combated. With respect to the leaks, what I must say is that is something that challenges the entire trust in our system of intelligence gathering and communicating it and moving it through the channels where it can be acted upon. If I'm the ordinary person sitting at home listening to this, and I consider that someone's, I presume of high, very well educated, join the Intelligence Service of Canada, they take an oath to maintain secrecy. They are under obligation of the Security and Information Act that they will not divulge what they learn. And when they choose to break that oath, that is wrong, and it's very damaging. It undermines our system built on trust of this information. It puts lives at danger, and it breaches our compact of trust with our Five Eye allies who are engaged in the same business and share information, and in fact, allies around the world. So to my mind, that is most unfortunate, and it is a situation that jeopardizes how we go about our intelligence, and I can't speculate on the motives of who or what or how that happened. Autre question?
David Aiken Global.
David Aiken Global. Good afternoon. One of your conclusions suggests that there were no, the Prime Minister, you could find no evidence that they failed to act. But as I read your report, you're really referring to the 6, 8 instances of leaks. And in fact, the case, I'll put it to you, could be made that the Prime Minister, key ministers, senior leadership did fail to act to address the systemic failings in information management that you address, going back to multiple NSICOP reports, Judd reports, that was a failure by the political class, not the bureaucrats, not the system. They failed to manage the information better.
Let me say two things in response to your question. Number one, in looking at failures of appropriate action on foreign interference, we were tasked with the job of determining whether there was any negligence or conscious avoiding of dealing with those issues for some political reason. And we went through 9 different cases, the most perhaps prominent ones that was reported. And we did not find any evidence of that kind of negligence or acting in a partisan way. What we did find, your second point, is that we have a system that is not working effectively, not working as it should. And I don't think there's any surprise in that, as we've seen foreign influence growing quite dramatically with the focus on Russia in 2016, and look at what's happened in the United States with that. And then towards 2018, especially with the case of the 2 Michaels and so on, it became more Chinese interference. The two are very different. Russian is much more focused on destroying our democratic institutions. The Chinese interference is much more long-term, much more pervasive, and much more sophisticated in using disinformation and other things to protect what China regards as its special areas of protection, the so-called 5 poisons. And we have not responded quickly and as effectively as we should, especially to this accelerating rise in digital information and so on, and our human ability to interact at coming at that level. So there's a gap in that. But we're no strangers to that. All of the Western democracies are. We have much to learn from one another, and we have much to do to address those failings of the machinery of government, which are very real. And in the second part of our report, the next 5 months will work very earnestly with the different agencies and in public hearings to address that and to try to be as constructive as we possibly can and to engage the other agencies that are engaged in the same thing and to make it very open to the public.
Thanks. And I want to come back to this issue that my friends have raised about your resume, and I take note of your impassioned defense of your own ability to be impartial and your long career of being impartial. But as you know, with a lot of conflict of interest type situations, it's the appearance. It's the appearance of being beyond reproach. And so thinking about that, not the actual facts of the matter, were you the right person to have been selected to do this? And are you certain you're the right person to now lead the public process, that there's no one else in the country who might be more beyond reproach and have maybe a very similar background and experience that you have?
Yeah, I can't cast judgment on that, on my competence or relative competence with others. And yes, of course, there are, I think, lots of people that you or I could identify who would be very capable of doing a comprehensive review. What I can say with respect to the allegations of an appearance of conflict of interest, I took the trouble of seeking a legal opinion from a retired Supreme Court justice. It's Justice Frank Iacobucci. He was very clear that there's no conflict of interest with respect to the Trudeau obligation. So I have no doubt whatsoever that I had any conflict of interest, and no doubt at all, speaking myself, about my impartiality or my ability to bring my record such as it is for you to judge as to whether I'm capable of carrying out a impartial and inquiry based on integrity.
Emily Bergeron.
Vous avez conclu
You've concluded that there was no intentional ignorance on Mr. Trudeau's part or on that of any of his ministers?
concluded that there was no intentional ignorance or resulting to inaction from the prime minister, from ministers, and it was more like communication problems. But if so, how do you explain that many sources anonymously turned to two media to say to leak information? And there was also an open-ed in the Globe and Mail where the source said why she did that, and she said there was indeed inaction and ignorance of many alert signs, or so. What can explain so multiple sources turned to media if there was no inaction or ignorance, intentional or not?
Well, c'est une bonne question. It's an important question. The leaks are based on partial information, in some case documents, that don't tell the full story. And what I've tried to emphasize in the area of intelligence, one is dealing with different pieces of information. We use the analogy of painting a picture. It's a number of different brushstrokes. You must have most of all of them together before you get a picture, or a jigsaw puzzle as you're putting pieces in place until you finally get the pattern. So those leaks were based on partial information. And in our investigation, in our review of 9 different instances, based on open information, but more particularly classified information, we came to the conclusion that there was not negligence on the part of any of the ministers or the prime minister, nor malfeasance in the sense of attempting to twist this for partisan advantage, not at all. What there was is a system that is not functioning effectively in how we manage that intelligence, how it crystallizes into something that begins to be, this is difficult, and then into some recommendation for action. Our system is not producing that in the way it should. And in defense, we're not alone in having that kind of difficulty, but we have much to do to be much more effective, much more professional, much more harmonized. And that's where we hope to spend a good deal of time, including public hearings, in the second part of our mandate.
Sorry. So this is not my follow-up, but just to clarify, these sources, they are regular consumers of little pieces of information, as you say, so they can see the bigger picture. So in that context, my question was more why these people, knowing the bigger picture, or how things work within, and how these small pieces should be interpreted in the bigger picture, why would they still go to media? But my follow-up was more when you met with the leader of the oppositions that wanted to meet you, were your conclusions already drawn, and how did you take the inputs from them, and
Sure.
did you change any parts of your report? Because we saw this morning the former leader of the Conservatives saying he met with you, he thought it was unuseful, and it was a loss of time, he wrote.
Thank you for that question. The first part of it was that the leaks were not based on full information and turning all of the classified information. As we read those leaks and as we dealt with it, we came to the conclusion that there was a much fuller story that wasn't there. With respect to the comments of Mr. O'Toole, here are the facts. We, as we were asked to do in our mandate, contacted the leaders of the opposition parties to seek their assistance, both materials and meetings. On 4 different occasions, we approached the leader of the opposition, Mr. Polyev. On 4 occasions, we did not get a response to be prepared to meet with us. On one occasion, he sent a short reply that was not responding to the materials we needed. And as we came to the May 23rd deadline for our report, wanting to hear from the Conservative Party, and we did have the documents in which they set out allegations with respect to, I think, 11 different ridings, and we considered that going back to late April, early May. But round about May 23rd was the deadline from our report. We sought a meeting, and Mr. O'Toole responded quickly for a meeting, and that was on this past Wednesday, Sheila. A very helpful, lengthy meeting. Mr. O'Toole is a man for whom I have great respect. I know well. He's a former military man. He's cleared for top secret clearance, so he's no stranger to military intelligence. And he presented with us a review of the matters covered in the media and some modeling elections, in his view that in perhaps a minimum of 4 or a maximum of 9 instances, constituencies' results were affected by that. We took that material on the Wednesday. We did indicate that our report was, a part of our report at that time had gone for translation because we were trying to deal with, but it was not final. We considered those materials with care. We responded to them with positions in our report, and we set them out. And we found we differ in our conclusion with Mr. O'Toole's conclusion that there was a tilt in those elections in 4 to 9 cases, and Elections Canada has found no interference. So that was our conclusion, which is different than Mr. O'Toole's. What he did also present was his very earnest and well thought out concern for the machinery of government and handling securities intelligence. Provided us with a great deal of advice, and we are looking forward to hearing from Mr. O'Toole in our follow-up hearings, because he has a very important contribution to make from his position on how we do a better job of machinery of government. So that's the story of Mr. O'Toole.
Could you just repeat shortly in French your response to Mr. O'Toole?
Brièvement.
Very briefly, this will be a challenge for me, but when we began our investigation and contacted the leaders of the 3 opposition parties, Mr. Singh and the leader of the bloc met with us. We did contact Mr. Polyev 4 times, starting in the last week of April and up to 3 or 4 days before our deadline for the report. He did not answer. On the last day, he sent a collection of material these were media reports. Then we contacted Mr. O'Toole for a meeting. We saw Mr. O'Toole on the Friday. He gave me a lot of very wise advice and the documents that he was suggesting. That there be between changes in 4 to 11 constituencies. We reviewed that material and we concluded that there is no proof here for this assertion. Our report is being translated at the time, and we reflected Mr. O'Toole's views in the final report. Mr. O'Toole is someone I greatly respect. He's a veteran. with a top security clearance when he was in the military. He contributed a great deal, or could contribute to our mandate, the second part of our mandate, about the machinery of government in the future.
And then back over here.
Hi, Rachel Aiello at CTV News. So you've made clear that there are limitations in what a public process would accomplish. So can you explain how a public hearing is going to get Canadians closer to any answers and accountability in ways that an inquiry wouldn't? Or are you kind of moving away from the look under the hood and basically telling Canadians now, take my word for what I found there?
What we're saying is that a public inquiry into the questions of who knew what they did at what time and what they did with it cannot be discussed in public, because to understand that fully, you must deal with classified information. So the very process is not possible to get at things that you really want to get at, that people want to get at. Moreover, even if one did that in camera, that interrogation and so on, looking at classified information, you can't report it publicly, because that's forbidden by the Security Information Act, and it leads to all the perils I just spoke about, of danger of people's lives, undermining of our systems, and breaching faith with our 5I appointments. What we can do in public, and we can do it, or another inquiry could do, is to take information that is in the public realm, to examine our machinery of government for handling foreign intelligence, and come to some conclusions on how we can do better. And it's very clear to me that we can do better. One only has to look at other jurisdictions around the world dealing with this very alarming and spreading system of foreign influence to know that there are ways we can improve. And we will undertake that over the course of the next 5 months. NSICOP and NSIRA will do so. And I'm very anxious that Parliament performs its proper accountability and oversight function to say, we have a really serious problem here that's growing, and it deserves the careful, thoughtful attention of Parliament is the most important body.
And there seems to be suggestions that, there are elements of interference happening, intelligence around that, but not evidence. I'm wondering what your thoughts are based on what you've looked at so far, whether governments can do more to act. Obviously, Canadians are wanting some sort of accountability or consequences for foreign actors. So what would you suggest the government do to show that they are being proactive to address allegations of interference when they arise?
You're very correct in your question. Much more can be done. We set out in a section of our report what has been done from about 2015 on, with 7 or 8 different institutes trying to improve, trying to perfect, trying to make things better. That still falls short of where we should be. And it falls short because this foreign influence is growing. It's pernicious, pervasive. It's not easy to deal with. But we expect that in our next 5 months, in the second part of a mandate, to deal with precisely the question you've raised. We can attract the best intelligence of Canada in public hearings, where there will be an opportunity to see these things in the light of day, and especially learn from what other jurisdictions have done in dealing with the same problem.
We're coming down to about the last 5 minutes before a closing statement. I realize there are many of you online. Perhaps if we could either go faster or stick to a single question, we might get more in, but I don't want to get into that debate. You can argue amongst yourselves.
Je m'excuse pour mes réponses qui...
I'm sorry, my answers tend to be long.
About taking your word for it. You've said NSICOP and Sarah will obviously check your work and pass judgment on your conclusions, but obviously Canadians will still end up having to take their word for it. Is there a problem here that Canadian voters will have to take the word of other sources and not be able to see this intelligence? Is there perhaps a problem here with overclassification of information?
Well, yes, there is a problem in that one can't divulge everything that Canadians would like to know. Can we do more in being somewhat more transparent with what is classified or not? I think we can somewhat. And some other jurisdictions have handled this transition from intelligence to evidence with somewhat more nuanced rules than we have, beginning with perhaps looking at the Security and Information Act, et cetera. So I think that can be done, but it can't give a complete answer to your good question. No, we cannot take all Canadians into full confidence saying, here's the classified information, come to your own judgment. With respect to whether we have the appropriate accountability mechanisms, that's Parliament. We have two bodies that were created by statute, one in 2017, one in 2019. I think growing in their ability to take on this accountability response. If they're insufficient, that's Parliament's job to say we must do better with our oversight mechanisms. Who is the watchman of the watchman? And one should not be having a special interrogateur or rapporteur to deal with that.
On NSICOP, because you are putting a lot of emphasis on it, I believe in the report you do raise some concerns with the politics and the partisanship that have surrounded this issue. NSICOP is ultimately a political body made up of politicians. Do you have faith that it can put politics aside and get at this issue?
Well, I really hope that we can diminish the partisan activity. I mean, one only has to look south of the border to see how that has paralyzed a system of government. We can't allow that to happen in this country. This is a precious country. U.S. News and World Report does annual surveys of the most admired countries in the world. Canada's #1 or in the top 2 or 3 places. That's blessed. That's precious. And, you know, our responsibility is to make this experiment, inclusivity, which is Canada, work effectively. And that's Parliament. That's who we elect to govern us and provide appropriate systems. Can we do better in this particular system? Much better. We have much learned others, and we must be conscious that we're dealing with something that is not a passing fad. This is serious stuff, and these hostile actors have the real intention to bring down our democratic institutions. And just look what's happened over the past, 15, 20 years as we've seen the diminution of democracy, the reduction in the number of fully functioning democracies, and the success in persuading countries on the cusp that autocratic authoritarian governments are the way to deal with their problems. Democracy is challenged. Let's not say in fundamental peril, but challenged. And my heavens, if any country in the world should be making democracy work, it's this country, Canada. And that's what we must get about.
Justin Ling, and then I believe it might be time for closing comments.
Great. You deal really briefly with the question of Han Dong's meeting at the Chinese consulate, enough to say that it's inaccurate to say that he called for the prolonged detention of the two Michaels. But here's a guy who you conclude was the beneficiary, unwittingly, of Chinese interference, meeting with a hostile foreign power, but you don't say anything more about it. Can you give us any more details? Is that something that should be declassified? And does it strike to that question of trust that we don't know why he was meeting with the Chinese consulate and not telling his government about it?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to the report, and the reason I'm going to the report is I must be careful about the two parts of my brain. One part of my brain has open information in it. The other part has classified information. And Sheila, you will watch carefully. But I think we should go to the report to deal with that question. This is page 23. And forgive me, but let me read exactly because you understand the dilemma I have. The PRC interfered with the nomination of Han Dong as the Liberal Party candidate in Don Valley North. Global News. Is that the issue that you're raising?
Well, yeah. I mean, we know that he met with the consulate based on the intelligence you reviewed, but we don't know why. Here's
what we say. I reviewed the intelligence relating to this allegation, interviewed various officials. I can report the following. Irregularities were observed with Mr. Dong's nomination in 2019, and there is well-grounded suspicion that the irregularities were tied to the PRC, the People's Republic of China Consulate in Toronto, with whom Mr. Dong maintains relationships. In reviewing the intelligence, I did not find evidence that Mr. Dong was aware of the irregularities or the PRC's consulate's potential involvement in his nomination. The Prime Minister was briefed about these irregularities, although no specific recommendation was provided. He concluded there was no basis to displace Mr. Dong as the candidate for Don Valley North. This was not an unreasonable conclusion based on the intelligence available to the Prime Minister at the time. So that is our open report. We've had some more detail in our confidential report about that particular issue.
Okay, so let me ask you this. The government has been quite forthcoming when there's been instances of Russian interference in this country. Based on what you just read, they were not forthcoming with the public or with the opposition parties about Chinese interference. With the benefit of hindsight now, did the government err by not telling the public more specifically what China was doing to influence our political sphere?
I don't think there was any conscious desire to suppress and to diminish this. I think it was clear that we have not acted as quickly and as thoroughly as we have as a threat that has been growing. And the Chinese one is the one that came into prominence only in the last 3 or 4 years. As Mr. Joyce of the National Security Intelligence Agency in the U.S. says, that Russian interference in the U.S. Came in like a hurricane 5, 6 years ago. Chinese interference came in like climate change. It's longer, persistent, very widespread, and very damaging. I think it's clear that we have not come to grips with the degree of Chinese foreign influence that does exist, and we have much work to do a better job of that. And yes, the responsibility lies with the government of the day to look at how we're dealing with this threat and whether we're meeting it effectively. And I think, as we say, in terms of the machinery of government, we have a lot to improve.
We might have started a little late. I know there's supposed to be 5 minutes for closing comments. We do have, I believe, Radio Canada and Canadian Press. It would be very nice if you could take one question from each of them, but we have a deal on your time, but I would appreciate it.
Thank you. One more question each. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Mickey here with the Canadian Press. I guess, how bad is the current arrangement regarding the flow of information of intelligence, and do you expect to recommend legislative changes?
We have serious issues to deal with. We set out in our report a fairly considerable list of the things we are looking at. I would be very surprised if we don't see quite considerable changes, not because things are awful, but because things must constantly improve. And it won't come simply from us, although we'll have some. We expect other quarters, particularly the 2 review committees, to be doing precisely that. But I commend you to the portion of our report. Do you have the page number, Sheila? Where we actually set out what has been done by way of reforms, 9 or 10 initiatives over the past 3 or 4 years, but much more to come. 54 and 55. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up? You said political parties ignored facts in favor of slogans. Does that include the Liberal Party as well?
Say that again?
You mentioned in the report political parties ignored facts in favor of slogans. Does that include the Liberal Party as well? Can you give some examples?
I missed it. In favor of slogans?
Facts in favor of slogans, yes.
I don't know what that expression means, facts in favor of slogans.
It was in the report. It said political parties had ignored facts regarding, intelligence and foreign interference, and they basically politicizing the issue.
Well,
did the Liberal government do this as well?
I'm concerned about politicizing the issue, but I'm saying to be able to make accusations and so on must have the full panoply of information. In a number of instances, that full panoply was not there.
Bonjour, Monsieur Johnston. Christian Noël.
Good afternoon, Christian Noël.
On foreign interference like Australia information services are?
The short answer is, I think, yes. That said, we recognize fully the difficulty that CSIS has in dealing with this business of keeping information classified, but at the same time informing Canadians. It's been heartening to see that, particularly over the past 2 or 3 years, with respect to the reports that they have been made, they're much more fulsome. The efforts to have public information systems are increasing. And in fact, the briefs to parliamentarians, I think there were 49 in the most recent year, on what are the threats to. The Canadian Securities Establishment has also worked very hard at trying to acquaint Canadians about the threat. But the heart of your question, the point très central, généralement.
The central point is that, generally speaking, the public does not understand this threat. It's not our view. So we have a lot of work to do, especially with public communications. If you'll allow me a last question, no public inquiry because it'd be too complicated because of intelligence. Now you're going to have public consultations. How will it be useful? How will it be more than a PR exercise? Well, the first question is a matter of who, what, when, where.
Clairement.
To answer that question clearly, we used classified information. It's impossible to put that out in the public. it's impossible to consider this whole matter transparently in the open. But we are going to attempt to do that in the second portion of our mandate.
Just public exercise, a public relations exercise.
No, I hope not. I hope it, Jesper says that, and
Hope it will be a matter of considering the problems and recommending solutions with the experts we have in our country. And we have a lot of experts. Thank you.
merci tout le monde. Merci.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your attention and your patience. Unfortunately, I'm a professor and I talk too much.
I understand. Did you have any closing comments or no?
I think I've had everything I need to say. Sheila, is there anything that I should do with a summary?
Not anything except to say the professionalism that we encountered with all the people who helped Mr. Johnston in his work was excellent. We are blessed with a public service that is very top-notch.